Thank you. So good to be with you again. You folks do some incredible work down here. Down everything that I reference is down there. So I'm happy to be with you again today. The title of today's talk is Democracy is Not Unity. So I was here, January. That's when we did the kickoff. But you and I sat down with some other folks before that, and we had this conversation, and I made the comment that I said, well, democracy is not unity. And one of the team members says, well, that would be a good sermon. So I'm not going to give a sermon today because I know you've already had one, and that's enough. But I do want to talk a little bit about where we are, give it some historical perspective, and then how we can address the issues before us in this coming election. So in 2016, Donald Trump had just been elected president. Honestly, I did not sleep that night. And I had to be up for an early meeting. But I was driving down the highway in Algoma, and as I was driving, the sun was coming up, and I just said to myself, well, at least the sun is still coming up. After that, I had an interaction with a cousin of mine who lives in Tennessee, a woman who's a couple of years older than me that I haven't really connected with for a long time, but I'm trying to reconnect with my cousins. And she's a big fan of the MAGA movement. And so we exchanged some things, and one of the things that she said is, well, we have to unify now. We have to unify behind Donald Trump. And it occurred to me that that's not democracy. You know, whether it's Donald Trump or Joe Biden or anybody else, it's not democracy for us to be unified, because democracy doesn't work that way. But today we find ourselves, and so we got into some controversy about how to deal with immigration, and her ideas were just so far off the wall. I stopped. I just couldn't do it anymore. But we are engaged now in some real conflict, right? Because we're engaged in culture wars. I remember when I was protesting the Vietnam War, the one sign that really caught my eye was, what if they gave a war and nobody came? So what if they gave a culture war and nobody came? Well, we can't do that, right? We have to respond. But we don't have to. We don't have to fight the way that they are choosing to fight. Inevitably, those who radically advocate for liberty, and this is my cousin, and this is the culture wars, inevitably they invoke the founding fathers, as if at the beginning of our nation there was unity. Everybody agreed this is how it should be. I see a lot of shaking heads. Okay, so this is going to be a short history lesson because you all know. This is not how it was. And in fact, there were two Unitarians who led this conflict. John Adams came from the New England Unitarians, who descended from the standing order churches that were set up by the New England Puritans. And he was very much in favor of having religion play a very obvious role in American government. He led well, in the early days, we didn't know what to call our leaders, right? So he was on a Senate committee called the Senate Title Committee. And after rounds and rounds and rounds and rounds, they decided what they should call the president, what they should call George Washington is His Highness, the President of the United States and protector of their liberties. The other Unitarian in this story is Thomas Jefferson, and his response to that was, "It's the most superlatively ridiculous thing I ever heard." So from the beginning, this conflict between the ordered churches and the more libertarian voters of Thomas that supported Thomas Jefferson came down. It's this conflict between order that's imposed from the top and governance that arises from the bottom, from the masses, from the people, however you want to say that. And this conflict has been going on since then. So the Democratic Republicans that were represented by Thomas Jefferson, they thought everything should be decided, not everything, but they thought popular vote should be emphasized. We're still a republic, so we still elect representatives, but it's the popular vote that should be taken care of. That should make those decisions and choose those leaders. And this was all well. This was all well and good with the smaller religious sects, the Baptists and the Methodists and the Quakers. Because the dominant religions in those days, the dominant sects were the standing order churches, either the Congregationalists or the Unitarians. They were fighting amongst themselves. And the Presbyterians, which was the American, at that time, the American iteration of the Church of England, which was ensconced in Virginia and in the Carolinas. So those two ends of the nation were like, let's have order imposed from the top. But the states in the middle Atlantic states, were more diverse. They had the two largest ports in the country, and those ports just brought in a whole bunch of different kinds of people. I got to stand over here so I don't keep hitting that thing. They just bring in a whole different kind of people. And so they were more in favor of having this homegrown, this rise up from the people form of government. The struggles went on through 5 presidential administrations. George Washington took kind of a noble stance towards it. I will call it noble. He never talked about his faith. He went to church because he was a man who was focused on his reputation. So going to church was important. It was important for people to know that he went to church. But he never talked about it. He didn't include it in his administration. Even though John Adams, who was responsible for the inauguration, insisted that following the ceremony in the federal building in New York City, they all get up and process across the street to Trinity Church and have a worship service. And that happened because Washington is like, okay, fine, we'll do that. And then Adams came into power, and he was all for national days of prayer, making sure that prayer happened on the floor of the Senate and the House of Representatives, and ensuring that religion got embedded into the government. I'm sorry? And he was Unitarian, yes. Yes. He's interned in the Unitarian Church in Quincy, Massachusetts. The Church of the Presidents, if you ever get that way. It's an interesting tour. But then Jefferson came along and worked against that embedding of a religion into government process. And Madison came after him and was even more adamant about it. So that conflict continued to rage until Monroe came in and sort of settled the issue. And his way of doing it was to launch the War of 1812 so that people would have something to rally around. And so eventually, government-sanctioned churches, those churches who were advocating for sanctioning it by the government, lost their power, lost that fight, and converted to what they called voluntary associations. And those voluntary associations, they weren't churches, they were groups of people who were adamant that Christianity should still be the law of the land. And so they went. And so they continued to advocate for that. Thomas Jefferson says, I acknowledge the right of voluntary general associations for laudable purposes and in moderate numbers. I acknowledge, too, the expediency for revolutionary purposes of general associations coextensive with the nation. But whereas in our case, no abuses call for a revolution, voluntary associations so extensive as to grapple with and control the government, should such be or become their purpose, are dangerous machines and should be frowned down in every regulated government. Frowned down. I'm not sure that we're going to frown down the voluntary associations that are rampaging today. So all of this you can read more extensively in a book by Reverend Dr. Forrest Church. It's called So Help Me God, that he wrote. I think the early part of this century. I attended a gathering when he was launching that book. I think it was the early part of the 20th century. So this went on, and this kind of settled with Monroe, and then there was one of these general associations was formed called the National Reform Association. And they proposed amending the preamble of the U.S. Constitution. This was in 1863. It said, we, the people of the United States, humbly acknowledging Almighty God as the source of all authority and power in civil government, the Lord Jesus Christ as the ruler among nations, his revealed will as the supreme law of the land, in order to constitute a Christian government, and in order to form a more perfect union, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. That's the amendment that they proposed in 1864, actually. They wrote it in 1864. Went to Washington in 1864. This was a group called the National Reform Association. Oh, the NRA. Oh my. Well, President Lincoln dismissed it out of hand, and Congress sat on it for 9 years, and finally rejecting it outright. But in these words, we can hear the undertones of today's moral majority, Christian nationalism. So this has not gone away. Those who advocate a top-down order, power from the top, telling people how to live their lives, more often than not are going to be associated with churches And if you see the movement, the MAGA movement today, this is the case. They are tightly committed, tightly integrated with some of the evangelical churches. And I'm reluctant to use that word evangelical. When I was in seminary, we were talking about this very thing, and this was, what, 14 years ago. We were talking about the same thing, and I used that term evangelicals, and the guy sitting next to me says, I'm evangelical. I don't believe any of that stuff. So, but this is, we've come to this, and so the term Christian nationalist, I think more precisely describes who these folks are. Because, you know, every Lutheran church calls itself an evangelical church. You know. Conflict has not gone away. And I contend it should not. Because that's what democracy is. Democracy is this crucible where we bring opposing ideas together. The top-down forces, when they're in power, decisions can seem arbitrary. People can feel powerless, unheard. With few decision makers, it's easier to corrupt them. And that can easily lead to oligarchy and tyranny. But if all the power is generated from the people, from the masses, if you will, a majority-held bias may not be able to be overcome. Minorities will find no way to come out of their powerlessness. Popular demands may overwhelm government coffers, leading to a decrease in services, which will make people irate, which can then lead to revolution. You know, there's extremes on every side. But when we have a democracy, when we have a structure in place that allows those forces to come together and talk it out and argue about it and do whatever political shenanigans they need to do within the context of an honest and open debate, then we have a system that allows us to make decisions that end up being best, I say. We're not going to win all of our cases. We're not going to get all the things that we want, but we are going to get a functioning society. I'm afraid that that commitment to democracy is under attack right now. So even though we are not united in our policy, we're not even united in our political philosophy, we are united in the idea that democracy is the way to resolve our differences, except for a small group of people who are very loud, very well organized, very well financed, and have some extraordinary communication skills and resources that seem to think the days of democracy have come to an end. That's what we have to do. That's our work now, to make sure that democracy does not come to an end. That's why we do the work that we do. That's why Woosan does the work that we do. That's why UU the Vote does the work that they do. That's why your Defending Democracy team does the work that they do. This has to be addressed at all levels. You folks work in Milwaukee. We'll work in Wisconsin. UU the Vote will work nationwide. And we all work together. We can remind people that democracy, that this representative form of government that is democratically elected, is the best option. So I look at it as you know, you might say that the top downers and the bottom uppers sort of balance out, but they don't really. It's more like a swinging pendulum. Like the liberals gain power for a few years because of some event. Say the stock market crash of 1929, which was, I'm going to go out on a limb because you probably have more historians in here than I have. But it was a direct result of capitalism gone wild. And when when the market crashed and that political philosophy of top down was in power, Herbert Hoover tried to use all of the philosophy of that side of the spectrum and failed, which opened the door for Franklin D. Roosevelt and the whole social welfare network that came up after that. And then we took it all the way through the Lyndon Johnson administration, where we started to open the door for civil rights. And we started to open the door and started to understand that, hey, not everybody's getting a chance to play this game. So let's open it up. Well, then the top downers had some ammo. Oh, look what they're trying to do. And they came back with Ronald Reagan. This is all economics, right? The whole argument is economic. I still find it a hoot that Ronald Reagan's economic policy was based on the Laffer curve. Even still. And now the pendulum has swung again. 40 years down the road, and the pendulum has gone. Our job is to make sure that that pendulum swings back, that it doesn't come off the hinge and go flying off into nowhere. That's what we have to do. Winston Churchill reminds us, democracy is the worst form of government, except for all the others. We have to fight hard. We need an electorate that is committed to participate. We need an electorate that is educated on the issues, that cannot be hoodwinked, if you will. I heard that word today when talking about the Wisconsin constitutional amendments that passed. People were hoodwinked. Honestly, I think what happens is that the political parties understand that most people don't pay a lot of attention to this stuff. We pay attention to it because it's a matter of importance to us. But I work as a hospice chaplain in Door County. And the people that I visit, they don't care about this stuff. They're caring about the everyday stuff. Not just the people who are dying, but the families and everybody. They don't care so much. They care more about making sure that that loved one is comfortable, making sure the children are getting to school, making sure we get to the grocery store, and that, the rainstorms don't blow over the windmill, or whatever it is that's on their mind. They're dealing with day-to-day stuff. And when I talk to those folks, I don't bring my politics into the conversation. They don't bring their politics. We talk about the day-to-day stuff. And this is what people want to concern themselves with. Oh, look, I do go on. So, our democracy is under attack. But what happens when we are under attack is that we do come together. We find a way to unify. 9/11, Pearl Harbor, brought this country together. People in power may not have used that power wisely, but at least it brought us together for a while. What's Wusan do? To help you. Because Well, you know the old saying, all politics is local. You folks, you're defending democracy team and League of Women Voters and Wisdom and all of those other groups are working locally. We don't have the resources to go out and engage in every local activity that UU congregations are involved in. But we have the ability to make sure that everybody knows what's going on. And so that's our primary purpose at this point, is to make sure that you know what's happening in Eau Claire, Eau Claire knows what's happening in La Crosse, La Crosse knows what's happening in Green Bay, and everybody knows what's happening in Madison. So what we're going to encourage you to do. So we've done postcards. We did postcards in the last election. Congregations like doing postcards because it gives you all a chance to get together after service, sit down, chat, write some things out, and feel and know that you've done something that's going to get somebody's attention. Our postcards simply are an invitation to make sure that you know that you are going to vote and that you have a plan to vote. We're also going to invest in some materials so that you can do tables at street fairs and street events, summer events. We'll get a table skirt. We'll get flyers. There's some flyers here as an example. We'll have some flyers you can hand out. And we're going to provide you with some training so that when you do an event, like a public event, like a tabling event, you have the skills to talk to people who are going to come up to you and challenge you. That you can have a useful and valid conversation with them without getting angry and without shouting. We're also going to do some trainings about what your rights are as a voter. We had a meeting yesterday, and one of the participants was talking about the problem that she had because she got an absentee ballot for a different district, for the district that she doesn't vote in. And she had to go and exchange it, and it became a real problem, and the clerk wouldn't take it, so she had to call the Wisconsin Elections Commission, who then told her that the clerk should take it. So when she went back with an email from the Wisconsin Elections Commission, the clerk decided she could take it. You have to fight for your rights, especially in this election, because there's one party whose only strategy for this election is to disrupt the election process. They have no other strategy. They have no policy statements. Disrupt the election process. It is a direct attack on our democracy. And it's time it's time now to stand up and do that. You can help us if you go to wusan.org, W-U-U, that's like quadruple U, SAN.org. You can sign up to receive our newsletters. We have a monthly newsletter. We have a weekly listing of events that comes out. You can also go to the donate page and provide us some funding because you can't do nothing with nothing. So thank you for your time. I want to introduce Nora Rassman. Nora is well known in this congregation. Her parents are members of this congregation. Nora has just been named the democracy strategist for UU the Vote. So her goal is to do national work. Wusan is going to make sure that you get notified when those things happen so that you can participate if you will. Yeah.
Is this effort also going to involve the League of Women Voters so that they can spread the word more?
So we're going to be in touch with League of Women Voters on a statewide level. We're going to encourage each congregation to be in touch with their local League of Women Voters chapter so that you can participate with them. We don't necessarily want to duplicate stuff, but we do want to add some strength to people. So before we run out of too much time, Nora.
Good. Okay, and for Mark. Hey, everybody. I'm Nora, and I'm a millennial, so I don't have a printer in my home, so I'm going to read a couple of things off of my phone. Um, but hi, I'm Nora. I grew up in this congregation. I'm really grateful to be back here. And I am now the democracy strategist at UU The Vote, which is the National Unitarian Universalist Association's electoral engagement and activation campaign. Um, as Mark said, I was raised in this congregation, and I really see my own politics and values as being informed by the social justice work that happened as a young person for me here. I think you gave a comprehensive overview of where we are, kind of the lay of the land. I think a couple just responses and additions. I don't think I need to share with anyone that our democracy is really in a tight place right now. And as a Milwaukee resident, today is the Milwaukee 414 Day, if anybody is celebrating. And I was thinking about some of the democratic decisions that have been made in Milwaukee lately that I feel really mad about. The tax increase, really the decision to welcome the RNC with open arms. Like there are some poor decisions that have been made by our democratically elected representatives here. And I think that my work as democracy strategist is to continue to build our long-term accountability strategies as Unitarian Universalists, both at the electoral sphere, but also for people who are elected. And so I think that my year-round work is a little bit different than UU The Vote has been in the past, which has been really connected to electoral cycles. And we're really interested in how we build a more participatory democracy year-round. I don't know if folks are connected to or familiar with the work of the African American Roundtable, who have been doing a lot of participatory budgeting work here in the city. But it is one example of how we build democratic practices year-round and how we build a city budget that represents closer to our values and really invests in the community organizing around the clock. So what's happening for UU The Vote this year is a combination of direct voter contact, which is work that we have been doing for a couple cycles, postcarding as one way that folks have really gotten involved in the past. But if we think of kind of a ladder of engagement, postcarding is where we want people to come in. And then we really are wanting to get people on phones and whenever possible, talking to people in our community. The most impactful conversations we can have with community members and other voters happen pupil to pupil. And we know that there's lots of reasons why people don't do in person. And I think our work is really to make it more possible for more of us to say yes to this summer and this fall, coming out in person, having conversations with people in our own communities and in our own lives. You know, I think that if folks are familiar with the concept of relational organizing, it's a pretty basic concept. You talk to people you know. You probably all already do that. You're much more effective than a random person calling or showing up on doors. And so one of the things we can do as congregations who often tell me, everybody in my life votes. Well, I bet everyone in your life is also quite busy, whether it's with their families, tending to their own medical needs, with their jobs. And so one of the things we can do is ensure that every single person that we know in any contact in your phone, can you guarantee that they have a voting plan in November? And we want to make sure that they're going to show up too. Because as someone who's worked on elections for many years, sometimes I forget to vote until election day. And there's no reason for that. I shouldn't be scrambling on election day to make sure I get to my own polling location. And so we know that persistent, like regular voters also need a little nudge. So UU The Vote is kind of just, we're in the getting started phase. If you go to uuthevote.org on our events page, you'll see we have like a getting started event happening this Thursday, which is a national event that's going to give folks an overview and answer questions about how to start building a team, which I know there is a vibrant Defending Democracy team happening here already. We have some weekends of action happening in Georgia leading up to their primary, which is in mid-May. So where we'll be calling voters with Georgia Latino Alliance for Human Rights, as well as in Arizona connected to their abortion protection ballot. People are doing petition gathering right now. I think just like in response to like, how are we doing work in addition to voter contact? I think that our expectation and hope is that people continue to do the rigorous voter registration that I know people in this congregation have done in the past. And as we look towards November, figuring out, do you have the opportunity and availability to actually become a poll worker? We're partnering with Power the Polls, which is a national organization that fills in gaps of poll worker recruitment. And if you have the ability, that is always something that Milwaukee County is looking for, and then throughout the state. And so if you have the ability to become a poll worker, recruit some pals, it's a fun day. You get compensated a little bit. Sometimes you get lunch. But it's really, really important because not having enough poll workers is one way that voter suppression manifests when poll locations actually can't open because of a lack of capacity. And lastly, we're really orienting towards how do we deepen relationships post-November, right? Like I want us to, in December, have a debrief conversation and say, our relationships with local organizing partners are better and stronger than they were in April. And that makes us ready for whatever happens in November. And so I'll be here after youthevote.org. I live in Milwaukee, really glad to be here. And thank you.
So we have about 5 minutes. Questions for me or Nora? I saw your hand first, so.
I don't know how to say this question, I'm gonna try my best, but I've dealt with hurricanes. I'm a club that is. What I've always found is a disaster averted, nobody cares. But when they have a disaster, it's always disaster destruction. Nobody remembers all the ones that might have been prevented from smart things. I sometimes feel the same way about where we're at. Our history is not being taught very well in our high school history. So people don't understand how close in the past we've had bad things happen. We've gone through a long stretch. I'm going to say this, but don't yell at me. It's been fairly good. Nobody's had anything that's really been completely terrible. Personally, different minorities or global majorities, global majorities in our country have had that. How do you do that? You understand the things that are happening that we forgot are just been basically life.
How do we do that? Well, we just get out there and do the things that Nora suggested, do the things that Woosan is gonna do, and just make sure that we have our voices heard. Get out wherever we can, talk to your friends, not only about voting, but about this impending catastrophe. My sister has an idea that nothing is going to happen without a tragedy. We can't afford this tragedy. Because as soon as we lose our democracy in America, global forces that are much more powerful than our population are going to come to bear. You want to answer that? You want to respond? Yeah, go ahead.
I think one thing we've been talking a lot about is the need to tend to the grief and anxiety people are experiencing and the real reasons why people are pulling away from engagement. And, and a lot of it is the legacy of suppression and the ways that people have been excluded from the system. But I think that like one of the things we as Unitarian Universalists can do is provide spiritual support for people and really meet people where they are, which is a lot of people are like really scared about what is happening, in our country. A lot of people are also experiencing extraordinary trauma and marginalization in their daily lives. And I think if we like build our skill around listening and actually engaging with people about, we are trying to build the terrain for more wins to happen. Our work is not necessarily to create a savior for us, but to create a target who may move some of our vision and values forward.
Respectfully disagree with your assessment that having the RNC here in Milwaukee is a bad decision by the Democrats. Rather, I think that it is an opportunity for those of us who are like-minded in the sense to organize and to be part of participating in democracy. I think that it does, having that convention here, it's going to be somewhere, and having it here does provide levels of income for the city and for some of us who are disenfranchised. So I think that your points, both of your points about organizing with the help of Busan and the work that you do and the work that we do right here in church can mobilize and energize those of us who think the right way about this election and where it should go. It's a perfect, in my view, opportunity to do so.
Good, thank you. Yes, one more.
It seems like issues are so complex that it's really hard even to try to stay informed. Don't have a lot of time to be able to do that. And you talked about the work, and I grew up in Kiwani County, right below door. And you're right, most people are just concerned about local issues. But it's these like global things like globalization, global free trade and all that, that's affected the whole lot. That's why so many of those former blue-collar Democratic voters went for Trump. And also climate change is affecting everybody. And that's something that has to be worked on globally. Yep. Even as somebody who's been environmentalist since the 8th grade, it's like 1958, I find it hard to keep up on the ins and outs and the complexities of climate change. So it seemed like one really important aspect is how do we begin to educate about these things? And the two things that I find really helpful, I religiously watch Amanpour and Company. Here is this incredibly good interview. It's really good people that are the thinkers and the activists at every level. And if we could have somehow or another have more of those kind of programs, because if you get boxed in with even just PBS or Fox News or whatever, you don't get these bigger perspectives.
Right. So
how do you get an informed electorate, which a democracy depends on?
well, I think the first thing you need to do is get a motivated electorate, get an electorate that wants to be informed. And you hit the nail on the head. There's so much information coming from so many directions, and now we have to deal with this onslaught of misinformation. How do you, first you have to hear it, then you have to determine where it came from, and then you have to figure out if it's true before you can actually start doing anything about it. This is our organizations, our churches, Wusan, you the vote. We've got to play a big role in helping people understand what the truth is. The facts, what the facts are. I don't want to say what the truth is. Let people determine their own truths, but at least make sure they have accurate facts. Okay. Fly. Get some flyers on your way out. Wusan.org. Sign up for the newsletter. Make a donation. You the vote. Whole bunch of stuff going on. Thursday night. National rollout. National kickoff. Let's go get it done. And go out and talk to your friends. Make sure they know what they're doing in order to vote. Thank you.